Have you ever seen an anime or a manga that starts off relatively simple? It's more or less just what the synopsis suggests, and nothing is out of left field. You get what you came for, and everything is normal, but it slowly becomes more and more absurd and unhinged, and turns into a different story entirely. Stories like these aren't rare or common. Off the top of my head, something like Made in Abyss comes to mind. This kind of progression can happen for a multitude of different reasons. 1. It could be an intentional choice from the author, and 2. It could be because the author just developed and had different ideas literally while publishing the manga. But whatever the case is, when done right, this kind of stories can be fascinating. You're like 100 chapters deep and you compare it to the beginning and it's like, damn, it's a completely different manga. One such example is the Delinquent Manga Out, written by Mizuta Makoto. Out begins as your average delinquent manga with the cool vibey smoking scenes, bikes, fistfights, and by all means was somewhat grounded. Characters can ace 5-on-1 fights or something, and there is a lot of police involvement. But then, as time goes on, the manga turns into torture and assassination plots, characters soloing entire gangs, delinquent crews being backed up by Nigerian mafia, and it becomes ridiculous, but that's what makes Out special, and a staple among delinquent mangas. And today, we're gonna break it all down. Out has cultivated a strong cult following even internationally, but it's still very niche in the mainstream landscape, so let's shed some light on this underground classic. Out follows the story of Iguchi Tetsuya based on a real-life figure of the same name, and Tetsuya is originally from Komae, where he used to be a pretty rowdy gang member. At the beginning of the story, he's fresh out of juvie and has been moved to the west side of the Chiba prefecture. He works at his aunt's barbecue spot and has very strict parole conditions, and his PO is a piece of shit. In the very first chapter, he gets into a fight with a local delinquent. He wants to avoid getting into trouble because his time in juvie was horrible. Every time he caused a scene, as punishment, he would have to fold at least a couple hundreds of these origami swans, and this scene is powerful. This is what I like so much about Mizuta's mangas. The visuals carry so much life. Look at the dread and frustration on his face. The bloody walls, it conveys psychological torture so effectively. The themes and messages of the first half of Out is more akin to something like a hood drama than any manga. But Iguchi, of course, being who he is, can't help himself and fights the guy anyway. After their fight, the two will share a smoke and become friends. The guy introduces himself as Abe Kaname, the vice president of a gang named Kirihito, and little did Iguchi know, his life would change forever from this point forward. In the following chapters, Iguchi would get more and more acquainted with Kirihito and get pretty close with not only Kaname, but also Tenzawa Atsushi, the leader of the 7th generation of Kirihito. During the first arc, Kirihito had a lot of tension with another gang, the Bakuraken, and in one of their fights, Kaname would get run over by a car and end up hospitalized. I'm skipping over a lot of nuances and little events in between because I don't want to stress this video too long, but this would send Iguchi on a path of vengeance. Kirihito and Bakuraken would settle their beef in a trilogy of 1v1 fights, and Iguchi would fight in Kaname's place. Iguchi is not an official member of Kirihito, so naturally this upsets some people. Anywho, the fight gets underway, and Iguchi would fight the man responsible for sending Kaname to the hospital, Kenzo, the youngest of the 3 brothers that ran Bakuraken. Iguchi would win in a pretty close fight, and Tenzawa also completely squashes the Bakuraken leader. And so the first arc officially came to an end with Kirihito's victory and the dissolution of the Bakuraken. Kaname would also recover from his injuries and things would return to normal, and the next arc would begin soon. And it's from here that things became quite insane. Gone are the semi-realistic setting and the underlying story about Iguchi trying not to get caught up, replaced by some of the most outrageous fights and conspiracy plots. This was a bold move, and some people prefer the themes and aesthetics of the first arc, but this is what gave Out its reputation as a delinquent manga on steroids. Things can become quite samey in the delinquent genre because a lot of it explores familiar tropes, and this was needed in order for Out to stand out, no pun intended. The second half of Out is unconventional and unapologetic and breaks all kinds of rules in fiction, but it somehow works. You see, Iguchi Tetsuya, the literal protagonist, becomes almost completely irrelevant for the following 100 chapters or so once the second arc begins. We just merely get his perspective on the events and witness the events through him because he declined Tenzawa's offer to join Kirihito. He's an outsider. The title Out has a few more meanings besides outsider, but it's been right in front of us the entire time. The second half of Out is about the 6th generation of Kirihito, the seniors of Tenzawa's generation, being released from prison and plotting revenge on the 7th generation. And the one man that is solely responsible for the beef between the 6th and the 7th is this gentleman, Minagawa Josuke, the 5th generation leader. And let me tell you, this guy is a complete psychopath. But there was the time when he used to be a stand-up young teen. He's 2 years older than Tenzawa and Kaname, and the 3 met in school. Josuke used to save Tanzawa and Kaname from being bullied, and overall used to be a very well-mannered kid, until tragedy would strike one day. While he was in school, Josuke's father was crippled in debt. Having no means left to provide for his family, eventually he would resort to something devastating, setting his own house on fire in an attempt to terminate himself and also his entire family along with it. Ironically, while Josuke's mother and grandparents would lose their lives in the fire, Josuke, his sister, and the father would survive. Josuke blankly gazed at his family's corpses until the firefighters would arrive, and in that moment, something inside of him changed. It was this event that turned him into a demon. Following this incident, he would become highly unstable and start having one violent episodes after another, even going as far as to purposely torture animals. At some point, he would become the fifth head of Kirihito and bring hell upon West Chiba, starting something called the Mad War that involved every major gang in West Chiba. This war was atrocious. People would go missing, some would get fed feces or get their ears blowtorched. This war, in many eyes, turned Josuke into an unstable maniac that was far too dangerous and impulsive to be left alone, even in the Delinquent World. And soon, even his own juniors would start planning to take him out. This was, of course, the sixth generation, led by Yoshiki Tsurumaki. You see, if you're a fan of modern rap, Josuke is like King Von. He has, allegedly, committed some horrifying things, but to some of his people, he is a saint, and a one-of-a-kind leader that they're willing to die for. And one of them is Tanzawa Atsushi. In Tanzawa's eyes, Josuke can do no wrong, because Josuke saved him when Tanzawa was on the verge of taking his own life. And Josuke's psychopathic behaviors be damned, he's not hearing it. All that matters to Tanzawa is the love and kindness that Josuke once showed him, and he don't play about his big homie. So naturally, Tanzawa won't stand for what Yoshiki is plotting. At first glance, it's hard to argue that the sixth generation is anything but reasonable, but there is more to this issue than meets the eye. Josuke used to have this manager of sorts by his side, Arashi Fukuyama, who was pretty much Josuke's voice of reason. He kept him in check and made sure Josuke stay focused and do not go completely crazy. And this man was once romantically involved with Kazuma Misuzu, or also known as Furin, a transgender woman from Yoshiki's crew. But as fate would have it, Arashi would break up with her at some point, thanks in part to this character Nagashima Keigo. Why Arashi felt the need to cut off Furin, a romantic partner, just to take under his wings Keigo, who is more like an apprentice to him than anything, is kind of confusing. It's because of this personal philosophy that he has about poison, which apparently Furin does not have. I'll just leave it up to your interpretation. But anyways, Furin would throw a tantrum over her breakup with Arashi and start targeting Keigo. But in doing so, she would accidentally expose themselves of having connections to a Nigerian mafia that is enemies with the sponsors of Kirihito. I know it's confusing, but basically, they claim Kirihito, but they're shiesty and loafing with the ops. Basically, the point is, the fifth generation messed up. In the end, Furin is unable to kill Arashi, but that is when the complete nutjob of the fifth generation, the most despicable character in all of Out, Kai, would take the shot and finish what Furin could not. Of course, with Josuke's advisor now gone, this could only mean one thing. And while Yoshiki was successful in his attempt to murder Josuke, they lost one of their members, Rukia, in the process, and in horrific fashion at that. He was literally gutted alive by Josuke. So that's basically what the 6th and 7th are beefing over. What this flashback teaches us is that both 6 and 7 are hypocrites. The 6 wants to pretend they killed Josuke because they had no choice, even though they had ulterior motives, and Tanzawa literally worships the ground that Josuke walks on, despite the guy being an absolute maniac. That's what makes this arc so good. It's hard to say they're right or wrong. It's just ignorant, violent teenagers sticking to their twisted sense of justice. Look at Minagawa Chihiro, the sister of Minagawa Josuke. Achan saved her from taking her own life, just like Josuke did to him. And Yoshiki also saved her life when she was kidnapped and brutally beaten up by Josuke's enemies. This highlights that Achan and Yoshiki both have good qualities to them, and they're just too stuck in their ways and the circumstances won't allow them to stand together. Even though the idea of teenagers fighting like Prime Tyson and doing business with Nigerian mafia and the Yakuza are so absurd, overall the manga feels real and personal somehow. And I think it's because at its core, Out is less like a John Wick or Mizuta's other manga bouncer, and more like those real-life Chicago and Florida gang wars that hip-hop YouTubers make documentaries about. Seeing these teenagers being stuck in a cycle of violence and not having a choice to enter normal society hits quite close to home. The action and the drama may be heavily exaggerated, but the issues of poverty and domestic abuse having disastrous effects on children and turning them into dysfunctional outcasts of society is very much real. and that's where Out is drawing inspiration from. And as I mentioned, Iguchi didn't do too much for the majority of the war between the 6th and the 7th, so in this arc, everyone kind of became little protagonists in their own ways. Every character has that one fight where they had to overcome life or death situations, and in that moment, they felt like the guy. It's a unique way to tell a story. Nobody is the main character. The entire gang of Kirihito is the main character. And in every fight, Mizuta does a good job of selling the tragedy of the situation. Some of these 6th and 7th guys used to be very good friends, and now whenever they face off, there is this feeling of, damn, it's unfortunate how everything turned out. With the story and themes of out of the way, let's chat a bit about the aesthetics and art direction of the manga. Out is one of the coolest looking mangas you'll ever read. There is so much individuality and personality in the designs. From the clothing that each gang wears that is specific to them, to the camaraderie and how different gangs have different rules. The world of Out feels so active and alive. Mizuta seems to be also heavily into philosophy, and it's reflected in both Out and Bouncer. There are these moments when the characters have these little internal monologues about their beliefs and viewpoints, and you get to learn more about the psyche of these delinquents. The art and paneling is also incredible. Wide establishing shots, beautiful scenery and sunlight in scenes when the characters are having a pensive moment of self-reflection. Some of these panels are so artsy that you would never think they're from a delinquent manga. Out scratches every itch, from humor to serious moments, to tragedy, to just straight up chaos. It's every trope of the delinquent genre turned up to 11. Out is soon getting a live-action adaptation, and the community is very active and alive, but is still so underrated. The delinquent genre is like the underground rap scene, with a very distinct and tight-knit community of fans, and Out is a cornerstone of this genre. For everything that Out has done for the delinquent subgenre of seinen mangas, it deserves to be up there with the likes of Tokyo Revengers. And even if it's not much, I hope this video brought some more attention to this cult masterpiece and helped it get the credit that it deserves. Thanks for watching, and make sure to subscribe for more.